Hi, I'm Bill Sanders, and this is an introduction to programming in PHP using object-oriented programming. This is better known as OOP, and it's a little different from the kind of programming that a lot of PHP users use, which is either sequential or procedural. And those methods are fine and they work well, but as your programs get bigger and bigger, and things become more difficult to organize, uh, object-oriented programming helps you organize things better. Now, you can do it with small projects as well, and so I thought, well, it might not be a bad idea if we just said, okay, let's just start off with object-oriented programming to learn it, and if you're learning it for the first time, then you're not going to have to unlearn something and then relearn it later. So anyhow, this is for those of you either who are new to PHP and want to learn how to use it. The people who use Raspberry Pi have it available. It's easy to download into Raspberry Pis, but it's also easy to download if you have a Windows machine or a Mac or a Linux box. Whatever you have, just about PHP runs in it. And PHP is considered a server-side language because it is interpreted on the server and then sent back to your client, in other words, what you're looking at on the desktop, to your browser as HTML. Okay, so it starts off as one language and is processed on the server and then sent back to you as HTML. And what you see on the screen is actually processed HTML. You don't, I mean, it's transparent, so the language itself has grown out of from a very simple language to one which is much more sophisticated and much more robust. It is a true object-oriented programming language because you have classes, you have all of the other kinds of things that are required for object-oriented programming. So this is going to be a simple beginning today, and we'll be looking at it. We'll go along fairly slowly, and then later on, as we develop skills, we'll be looking at some design patterns and some other things that are a little more sophisticated type of OOP programming. To get started programming in PHP, you start with two symbols. You begin at the very top left corner with a less than symbol, a little pointy thing pointing to the left, a question mark, and then PHP. This indicates to your interpreter that this is the beginning of the PHP program, and then at the end of the program you put a question mark and a greater than sign. That's pretty simple, and all programs in PHP will have that at the beginning and the ending. Now, since we're taking an object-oriented approach to PHP, we're not going to be putting in, mixing this in with HTML. A lot of times programmers will do that, and that's fine, but we're not going to be doing it here because we want to try to look at things in programming as different objects. And the objects that we're going to be working with are the classes, the properties of those classes, and then the methods of those classes. The properties are the characteristics or the different things in a class. Like property of a car might be a steering wheel, a seat belt, a rear view mirror, all of the things that go into a car. And the methods would be things that make it go or things that make it stop. You have an accelerator, we can think of that as a method to make your car go, and a brake as a method to make it stop. So in looking at object-oriented programming in PHP, the very first thing that we have is called a class. So the class is pretty simple. You put in the word class, and then you put the name of the class. And we're going to be doing a little Hello World program, so we're going to call the class Hello. You have a curly brace that indicates the beginning of the class, and another curly brace that indicates the end of the class. Now note, these all have to be within the parameters of the opening and closing PHP marks. So here you have class, the word class, hello, and then your opening curly brace and your closing curly brace. In PHP, you have a special function that is called a constructor function. If you're familiar with constructor functions from other languages, you'll probably know that they're typically named the same as the class. And so if you have public function hello within a class, it's the same thing that you have with PHP, except they use the word construct. Now, before the word construct, there are two underscores that you have to have. You have to look carefully. There are two instead of one. The word construct, and then you have an opening and closing parentheses. Now, the constructor function, this is what everything within this particular function is called. The constructor function is where you can put your basic code. Now, for our example here to get started, we're putting in a variable, and all variables in PHP begin with a $. So I'm going to call it message, E-S-S-A-G-E, and I'm going to assign it a value, and the value is hello world. I'll put an exclamation point. And the line must end with a semicolon. That's one of the things that's very important in PHP, is to end the lines within a function or within a class with a semicolon. If you're familiar with or use languages like Python, for example, you won't see a lot of those. On the other hand, if you're familiar with languages like Java, you're familiar with the use of semicolons. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have an echo statement, and echo works pretty much like a print statement in most other languages. So PHP also has print, but I prefer using echo because it's uniquely PHP, and also it differentiates from any kind of thing that you're thinking, well, this will print it out to a printer. So I'm going to print out message and end it with a semicolon, and right up here I have the name for it, and I'll save that. Just hit the little save sign there, hit it here, and this will save the program for me. At least I hope it will. And once I'm done here, I can't quite run it yet because I have to have something that's going to call that class, and so I'm going to call it with, we call worker. This is a name that I simply use for no good reason. I sort of like it. I got used to using it when I was doing some concurrent programming, and there are workers and clients within concurrent programming. So I thought, well, that's a pretty good name for something to fire off a class. It's sort of this is a self-firing one, by the way. Now notice that this is outside of the curly brace that defines a class, yet it's inside the PHP. In order to call a class, you have to call it from the outside. So what I'll do is that I want an instance of class. Now an instance of a class is called an object, and to refer to a certain class, I'll put in hello, new hello, H-E-L-L-O, and then I put the open and close parentheses, and then I ended up with a semicolon. Now I have my object or class called hello. I have the constructor function. Now what happens when you ever open a class, the constructor function automatically functions. In other words, it's automatically fired. As we'll see later, you have other types of methods or functions within a class that are only fired when they're called by an object. And we'll see how to do that later. But to get started, here, this is everything you need to do. And like I said, I use the term worker. You can have any variable name you want. By the way, variables, you can identify variables in PHP because they all have a $sign before them. Okay, to test it, I'll just give it a quick run here. And by the way, I have to test it from a web address. Now this particular one this is a tilde that it shows up as %7 and capital E, but it's really a tilde. And when you use a Unix-based machine like Macintoshes or Linux-based like the most of the Raspberry Pis are, you'll have to use a tilde. But you have to use a browser to run it, because really what it's doing is running it off the server. And the server on using PHP that most people have is called an Apache server. And you have to have that installed in order for it to work. It doesn't work like an HTML page that'll you can just double click and it'll come up. But anyway, to get started, here is your Hello World, your first program. It has a class, it has a function, and within the function there are there's one variable and it's assigned, and then you use echo, and that'll send it out to screen. In order to fire it up, you simply have assign it to a variable, any variable that you want. Now the important thing about this is that when you start reusing objects or classes, this is all you have to do instead of having to rewrite the whole thing. And some of them are small. I mean, to do this in an immediate mode, you'd put in print or echo hello world, and that'd be it. But when it comes to reuse and organization, you're going to find object-oriented programming much more useful. Okay, that's the end of the first lesson. Hi, I hope you like PHP, or at least getting started in it. What you can do now, if you have a Raspberry Pi and you don't know how to install PHP or MySQL, which is the back end to it, you can take a look at the two videos that I have listed above. Whoops, they're up there, by Matthew Manning. And they're good explanations of how to get all set up for using your Raspberry Pi. It also downloads an Apache server. The PHP requires some kind of server on your computer to run on it. And so you can download the whole thing and it installs itself, and it's really not that difficult of a process. And Matthew Manning has a very good explanation of that. The other URLs that I have up there are for general use for PHP and MySQL. Those of you who are familiar with PHP probably already are familiar. Also, too, you can find them on the website at www.php5dp.com. See you next time.